In this topic, we are going to discuss about generating research questions using gap spotting and problematization approach. First of all, try to understand why we are interested in learning problematization approach. Problematization is an approach significantly used by most of the authors, those who are publishing their papers in top tier journals like Academy of Management Journal, Administrative Science Quarterly, Journal of Management Studies and so on. Because using problematization approach, we will be able to develop an interesting theory that is significantly different from other theories already available in the literature. And the core reason why we are interested in developing research questions using problematization approach is developing an interesting theory and theoretical contribution. So this is the key purpose why we are interested in learning problematization as an approach for generating research questions. In one of the reference by Summers 2001, the paper title is Guidelines for Conducting Research and Publishing in Marketing from Conceptualization through the Review Process, published in the journal called Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science, summarizes 17 types of contributions which we can make it in our academic research process. Under the empirical contribution umbrella, they have presented 4 major topics. The first point is testing the untested path relationship between two variables which is not being tested in the past literature or existing literature. Second point is introducing a new mediator, and then third point is introducing a new moderator, and then fourth point is testing or investigating the psychometric properties of the importance scale and so on. This is one simple example which I would like to address here, how you can create empirical contributions in our academic research works in the field of social sciences. And another paper titled Trends in Theory Building and Theory Testing, a 5-decade study of the Academy of Management Journal, published in Academy of Management Journal in the year of 2007, talks about 5 ways of building a new theory. And through this way also significantly we can develop or contribute something to the existing body of literature, or we will also able to advance the existing body of literature. The first point is it attempts to replicate the previously demonstrated effects. It's just like that, replicating the existing evidences. This is the lowest form of building the new theory. And second point is examines effects that have been the subject of prior theorizing. That is the second point. And third point is introduces a new mediator or moderator of an existing relationship or process. This is the third point which I have mentioned. Suppose if you have an existing relationship between X and Y, in between we can introduce a new mediator or new moderator, and the entire mediational hypothesis or moderational hypothesis or moderated mediation or mediated moderational hypothesis will become new, and through that way we can also create good empirical contribution. And the fourth point is it examines a previously unexplored relationship or processes, which means testing the new relationship. This is the somewhat highest form of building a new theory or creating an empirical contribution. And then fifth point is, this is the final point which was mentioned in this paper, that is it talks about introducing a new construct or significantly reconceptualizing an existing construct which is available in the existing literature or past literature. So these are all the different ways how we can develop theoretical contribution in our empirical research work based on some of the evidences, published evidences. Now try to understand what is research question. So in simple sense, a research question guides and centers your research. It should be clear and focused as well as synthesize multiple sources to present your unique argument. This is a general definition coming from a web resource mentioned in the Vanderbilt University, USA. Some of the checklists also given in that web resource. The checklists are like how you can validate your research question once you are done with the research question preparation part. So the first point is it's something about curiosity or curious about and that others might care about. So that is what the first point. Second one is, does it present an issue on which I can take a stand? Third one is, does my research question put a new spin on an old issue, or does it try to solve a problem? And Next point is my research question too broad or too narrow or okay? Then next point is my research question researchable? That should be researchable first of all, within a specific time frame and limited resources available for our research purpose. And is next question, next checklist is my research question measurable? We need to have measurement approaches, unless we may not be able to measure our constructs. And what type of information do I need? Whether those informations are available? Will I able to collect those information? So these are the certain checklist which we need to validate before going for the next stage of the research process. One example research question I like to present here, based on a paper published in Computers in Human Behavior in the year of 2015, one of the top tier journal in human behavior, Computers in Human Behavior Research. The paper title is Switching Behavior and Customer Satisfaction in Mobile Services, Analyzing Virtual and Traditional Operators. So in this paper, they just analyze the relationship among service value, corporate image, attractiveness of alternatives, search effort and satisfaction, which in turn that is leading to loyalty, then finally resulted in switching intention. So here they have proposed two major research questions. The first question is, what are the main variables influencing mobile services customer satisfaction? That is the first research question which they have presented in this paper. The second research question is, what are the main switching costs in mobile services? That is the second research question which they have addressed. And the third research question is, what are the main differences regarding customer satisfaction and switching costs between traditional and virtual mobile services? So these are the three major questions which they have addressed in this research. Now try to understand what is gap spotting and then problematization. Predominantly in the existing literature, most of the researchers have used gap spotting as an approach for developing new research questions. Even some of the papers published in top tier journals includes this particular approach. But problematization is an approach where we are trying to question the existing assumptions of the theory, underlying assumptions of the theory. In most of the research works published in the past literature, everything is almost some of the research works are saying that most of the research papers are based on gap spotting approach. Based on gap spotting approach only they have developed the research questions. Now we'll try to understand what is gap spotting. So some introduction about these two approaches. As researchers, we all want to produce interesting and influential theories. The dominant view is that a theory becomes influential if it is true. According to McKinley, Monet and Moon 1999 paper, they showed that for a theory to receive attention and establish a new theoretical school, it must differ significantly from and at the same time be connected to the well established literature in the body of science in order to be seen as meaningful. One way how we can generate the research question is through problematization approach. It is the process of identifying and challenging the assumptions underlying existing theories. Therefore, it appears to be a central ingredient in the development of more interesting and influential theories within management studies. I'll give you a couple of examples in the later point of slides, but before that try to understand what is problematization. So problematization is an approach where significantly we are trying to question the underlying assumptions of the theory. However, established ways of generating research questions rarely express more ambitious and systematic attempts to challenge the assumptions underlying existing theories. Instead, they mainly try to identify or create gaps in existing literature that need to be filled. In most of the research works, either positively or mildly critically to earlier studies in order to extend this literature or to address this gap in the literature or to fill this gap in the literature or to point at themes that others have not paid particular attention to this area of research or to call for more empirical research. This is a sort of arguments which they might have presented in their introduction section to propose their research questions. And all those approaches are coming under one particular umbrella called gap spotting approach. So gap spotting means that the assumptions underlying existing literature for the most part remain unchallenged in the formulation of research question. Basically, our approaches are like simply we are trying to fill an existing gap. Wherever there are no literature evidences available, wherever there are less theoretical notions are available or theory support is available, we used to say that this area is unexplored in the past literature, or this particular relationship need to be tested because no one has tested in the past literature so far, and then this area is underexplored in the past literature, and so on. So this is the sort of argument we used to develop in the introduction part to propose our research question. This is mainly coming under gap spotting approach. In other words, gap spotting tends to under problematize existing literature and thus reinforces rather than challenges already influential theories. A paper published in Organization Journal in the year of 2011 by Sandberg and Alvesen, the paper title is Ways of Constructing Research Questions, Gap Spotting or Problematization. Both of the authors are from Queensland University, Australia. And they did some review by randomly picking some of the issues from Administrative Science Quarterly, Journal of Management Studies, Organization and Organizational Studies journals between 2003 and 2005. And they found that based on this analysis, they found that in all of the studies investigated, researchers have generated research questions by identifying or constructing specific gaps in existing literature rather than problematization or rather than questioning the existing underlying assumptions of the theory. They tried to either identify competing explanations to scan for overlooked areas or to search for shortages of a particular theory or perspective in existing literature. Then based on those gaps, they formulated their own research questions. This is how in most of the published evidences, they have developed their research questions or they have proposed their research questions. These studies suggest gap spotting, that is identifying or constructing gaps in existing literature that need to be filled, is the most dominant way of generating research questions from existing literature in management and other social science disciplines. It is, however, important to note that gap spotting rarely involves a simple identification of obvious gaps in a given body of literature. Instead, it consists of complex, constructive and sometimes creative processes. Through this way only, most of the researchers have proposed their research questions. And there are three forms of gap spotting approaches are presented in their Sandberg and Alvesen 2011 work on ways of constructing research questions, gap spotting or problematization, published in Organization Journal in the year of 2011. So the first approach which they have talked about is confusion spotting. So in confusion spotting, what they are saying is, it looks for areas where previous research on the topic exists, but the available evidence is contradictory. For example, let us take the relationship between X and Y. So I am saying that X is positively related to Y, and somebody else might have done a research and they might have established a finding which says that the same X is negatively related to Y. So I have a contradictory results available in the literature. So based on some theory, I am trying to say that it's X and Y relationship is positive, and some people are making some argument based on the theory support. Again, they are saying that the relationship between X and Y is negative. So this is nothing but confusion spotting. If I am able to identify some things in this way, then I can say that so there are contradictory results are presented in the literature, so I am interested in addressing this particular gap which is there in the literature, so I am proposing this research question. And then the second approach is neglect spotting. In neglect spotting, what they are saying is, it looks for something that has not yet been considered in existing literature, or not at all or not appropriately. Sometimes it is also referred as overlooked area or under researched area. By making some argument like this particular phenomena is overlooked in the existing literature or under researched in the existing body of literature. So I'm interested in answering certain research questions related to this aspect. This is the way how in most of the research works the authors have proposed their research question. And then the final one is application spotting. In application spotting approach, what they are saying is it looks for areas where there is not sufficient theory or certain method problems and suggests to apply a specific theory, a specific theoretical framework or a specific method to remedy the state of affairs. So this is what application spotting. So wherever there are less support for theory is available, so we used to do some research in that particular domain of research, and then we'll be coming up with some kind of theoretical explanation. So these are the three approaches mentioned in the gap spotting umbrella in their Sandberg and Alvesen 2011 paper. Before we getting into problematization approach, try to understand what is theory. According to Bacharach 1989 paper, Bacharach defines theory as a statement of relations among concepts within a boundary set of assumptions and constraints. It is no more than a linguistic device used to organize a complex empirical world. The purpose of a theoretical statement is twofold: to organize and to communicate. Organize is something related to posthumously, and communicate is something related to clearly. So according to Bacharach 1989 citation. So in theory, the understanding is we have some concepts and the statements, statement of relationship among the concepts, and theory will have some boundary limit also. So that boundary limit is constituting set of assumptions related to that particular theory. Now try to understand what is problematization. It aims to question the assumptions of underlying existing theory in some significant way. This is what the definition given by Sandberg and Alvesen in their 2011 paper published in Organization Journal. Sometimes problematization aims at breaking with the linear development of research imposed by gap spotting. So here linear development is something related to, for example, in 1980 somebody might have tested the relationship between X to M, and in 1990 somebody might have extended the particular theory by adding Y as another outcome, and in the recent literature they might have tested some of the moderating effect and then mediating effect, moderated mediational effect, and so on. So incrementally we are trying to advance the existing body of literature. So that is what linear development of research imposed by gap spotting. In most of the research works, that is what our primary interest. It aims at thinking differently and raising new research questions by challenging theoretical taken for granted assumptions. This is also another understanding how you can understand what is problematization. So problematization is not an end in itself. Indeed, the objective is not to destroy previous researches or to discover the incoherences of a theory. On the contrary, problematization implies a dialogue between previous researchers and a meta-theoretical position enabling the confrontation of different points of view. This is what Alvesen and Sandberg in their AMR paper, Academy of Management Review paper, they have argued. As a result, problematization encourages a positive research agenda. So now try to understand problematization as a methodology for generating research question. So I said problematization is an approach where we are trying to question the existing assumptions or underlying assumptions of the theory. So if you consider problematization as a methodology for generating research question, the first question which you need to understand is what types of assumptions are relevant to consider. The second question is how can these assumptions be identified, articulated and challenged in a way that is likely to lead to the development of an interesting theory. A topology of assumptions open for problematization presented in Alvesen and Sandberg 2011 Academy of Management Review paper is, there are 5 points are available. So while there is a range of different assumptions within the scientific field, we find it productive to distinguish 5 broad sets of assumptions that differ in both depth and scope. So the broad 5 sets of assumptions are questioning the in-house assumptions of the theory, and the second one is root metaphor, and the third one is paradigm, fourth one is ideology assumptions, and the final one is field assumptions. If we are going to question any of these assumptions, then that is known as problematization. The lowest form of problematization is questioning the in-house assumptions of the theory, and the highest form of problematization is questioning the field assumptions. So now try to understand what is challenging in-house assumptions of the theory. It refers to a set of ideas held by a theoretical school about a specific subject matter. So an example of in-house assumptions are trade theories within the rationalistic school, which typically conceptualizes leadership as a set of specific attributes such as formal knowledge, skills, attitude, and personal traits possessed by the individual leader. This is what the literature talks about. If we were to question the trade theory assumption that leadership is defined less by the trait of the leader than by the social context, we would challenge an in-house assumptions of leadership through this way. So most of the existing literature talks about leadership, leaders are well defined by their traits. But if you are going to question this existing assumption, our way of questioning is, we are trying to make some argument which says that leadership is less defined by the traits of the leader than by the social context. This is the way how you can question the existing assumptions of the theory, using questioning the in-house assumptions of the theory. Then second point is root metaphor. Root metaphor assumptions are associated with broader images of a particular subject matter. This is what the definition given in Morgan 1980 and 1997 works. Within management studies and other social science works, for example, it is common to see organizations as cultures in terms of a unitary set of values and beliefs shared by organization members. However, at the root metaphor level, authors have questioned assumptions around unity, uniqueness, and consensus, and they have emphasized differentiation, fragmentation, discontinuity, and ambiguity as key elements in culture. This is the way we can question this root metaphor assumption with respect to culture assumptions held by the organizational members in organization. Then third point is paradigm. Paradigm is defined as the ontological and epistemological and methodological assumptions that underlie a specific literature can be characterized as paradigmatic assumptions. The challenge of such assumptions is often a central ingredient for generating research questions or interesting research questions. For example, by adopting an interpretive perspective on professional competence, Sandberg 2000 challenged the dualist ontology underlying the prevalent rationalistic school, which conceptualizes professional competence as consisting of two separate entities, a set of attributes possessed by the worker and a separate set of work activities. However, from an interpretive approach, competence does not consist of two separate entities. Instead, person and work form an inseparable relation through the lived experience of work. Such a questioning enabled Sandberg to provide an alternative assumption ground and based on that to generate new research questions about professional competence. Fourth one is ideology assumptions. Ideology assumptions include various political, moral, and gender related assumptions held about the subject matter. For example, Burrow in 1979 suggested that researchers conducting studies of work should not proceed from the question, why don't workers work harder, and then investigate norms about a reasonable work performance. Instead, they should ask, why do people work as hard as they do? In a similar vein, Sivers 1986 challenged existing theories of motivation by suggesting that instead of asking how people can be motivated in organizations, they should ask why people need to be motivated at all if they experience their job as meaningful. The last most difficult form of questioning the existing assumptions of the theory is field assumptions. This is very, very difficult. This is the highest form of problematization. So field assumptions are a broader set of assumptions about a specific subject matter that are shared by several different schools of thought within a paradigm, and sometimes even across paradigms and disciplines. Simon's 1947 pioneer work on bounded rationality can perhaps be seen as a mild but successful identification and challenges of a field assumption. His challenge of the widely shared assumption that humans are rational decision makers and the alternative assumption of bounded rationality opened up a range of new and interesting research questions and theories in the past literature. This is one example to understand questioning the field assumptions of the theory. Now, I want to present two literature paper evidences in the recent literature where they have used problematization as an approach for questioning the existing assumptions concerned with their domain of research. One of the paper published in the Leadership Quarterly Journal in the year of 2013, the paper title is Revisiting Followership Through a Social Identity Perspective, the Role of Collective Follower Emotion and Action. This was done by T et al. 2013. So most of the past research works talks about leadership behavior is determining the individual behavior. So in most of the research works, we used to keep leadership construct as a antecedent or X variable, and then some of the outcomes as individual level variables like individual level task performance or worker performance and so on, or employee performance and so on, or employee behavior, employee attitudes and so on. But in this conceptual paper, what they have done is, using the problematization approach, the leadership is consistent with Alvesen and Sandberg 2011. Rather than simply build on the assumption that leadership outcomes are solely determined by the leader, we challenge this view by suggesting that followers too are active and influential parties that can also dictate leadership outcomes. This is what the core argument which they have presented in their work. And second reference is coming from Academy of Management Review Journal, a paper titled Task Complexity Extending a Core Concept, published in the year of 2015. So in this paper, what they have done is, using the problematization approach, they have expanded the existing, they have questioned the existing assumptions of the task complexity assumptions. For example, one of the dimension of task complexity is, the old assumption or old school of thought says that task should be separated from behavior, but the new assumption which they have proposed is tasks are inseparable from behavior. Similarly, the second assumption is tasks are separate from their material context. In the new assumption, they have proposed that tasks are inseparable from material context. Similarly, the old assumption is complexity is a property of an idealized task description. The new school of thought, new assumption says that complexity is indexed by observable behavior. And old assumption says that complexity is observer independent. New assumption talks about complexity is observer dependent. And in most of the old assumptions, the level of analysis is something related to task complexity is an individual level construct. But in the new assumption, they have presented that task complexity applies for any number of factors at any level of analysis. And the types of complexity under the old assumption is, there are a few predetermined types of complexity, that is component, coordinative, etc. Under the new assumption, they are saying that there are many mechanisms that can contribute to task complexity. The functional form of task complexity under the old assumption, which says that complexity is a linear function of task components. The new assumption says that complexity is an exponential function of task components. So by using problematization approach, they have contributed majorly 4 points to the literature. The first point is, it extends the concept of task complexity to task performed by multiple actors at different levels of analysis. The second point is, it integrates the concept of task complexity with the material context of task performance. The third point says that It proposes a general way to represent tasks as networks of actors, actions and information and to quantify the associated complexity. And the fourth point talks about by extending the concept of task complexity to include empirical observations as well as idealized descriptions, it provides the basis for developing and testing theory about complexity as a dependent variable, not just a control variable. These are the four major contributions which they have given to the existing body of literature based on the problematization approach. So the conclusion is the core aim of the problematization methodology or approach is generating novel research questions through a dialectical interrogation of one's own familiar position, other stances and the literature domain targeted for assumption challenging. Using the points which I have discussed in the early part of the video, like challenging the in-house assumptions of the theory, and then root metaphor, and then paradigm, and then ideology assumption, and then field assumptions. Thank you.